Hey, Critical Analysis, this is your very last chapter lecture video. This is chapter 10. This is for week 8. This is the only chapter that this week includes, and so we are done after this. So hopefully that is exciting for you as it is for me. So chapter 10 is all about critical thinking and the different types of thinking that go into this and the different kind of vocabulary and recognition of ideas and issues that go into the critical thinking process. And so throughout the chapter, as always, I encourage you to get into the actual chapter, in your textbook and read through, do some of the exercises on your own. One of the exercises you'll have to do for your text and skill sheet. If you haven't already watched that assignment video yet, you'll see what I'm talking about there. But then you're always obviously welcome to do kind of your own checking and thinking to see, how is it going? How well do you understand? So those are my objectives. Let's go down here. Now, if you are thinking about your chapter 10 text and skill sheet, I will tell you that the first few slides here go with the very first part of your text and skill sheet. So just keep that in mind. All right, so what is thinking? All right, we all do it, right? Every day, every second, literally. So our chapter defines it for us as organized and controlled mental activity that helps us solve problems, make decisions, and understand ideas. And most things can kind of fit under those very broad umbrellas, right? We are constantly doing those things in our minds. We're solving problems or thinking through things or trying to understand. So that's kind of just the basis of what thinking means. And if you've heard of Bloom's hierarchy before, I think we mentioned it in a previous, early on chapter. These are the different kind of levels of thinking, different things that people will use whenever, especially like in the world of education, like if you're an education major, but sometimes your teachers in other class areas will use Bloom's as a basis for like essay questions. They'll pull verbiage from like analysis type questions, evaluation type questions. So this is a hierarchy, meaning like normally this is presented in a pyramid, but your knowledge is kind of like your basic level of thinking. From there, you want to be able to comprehend, understand what it is that you're thinking about, reading about. You want to be able to apply it, analyze it, synthesize it, and evaluate it. So your textbook goes a little bit more into detail with those different levels of thinking. There's also analytical thinking, and this is where you are really looking at the nitty-gritty. So you're kind of pulling things apart, and you're looking to see how do all of these pieces work together to support this larger idea. So you're looking at maybe the supporting details, the causes, the effects, the examples, and really looking to see what is happening here. And it's all part of that critical thinking process. But analytical thinking is when you are looking at the different pieces and parts of something. And then ultimately the kind of the basis of the entire chapter, like critical thinking, is where you are really doing something in a very thoughtful, thorough, organized manner. And you're doing a lot of deeper level thinking. You're not just taking something on the surface level, right? Because we are all proficient thinkers. You are going and you are really analyzing. You're doing that analytical, right? You're tearing it apart. You're trying to understand it. You're trying to come to your own conclusions, trying to compare what you know with what you're learning. So all of those things go into critical thinking. Okay? So it's very purposeful, organized, thorough, deliberative thinking. So there are habits of critical thinkers. Again, for your chapter 10 text and skill sheet, if we're kind of thinking about that, this is a second part of it. So what are some things that critical thinkers should be willing to do, willing to plan? And this can be like in regard to like just like an everyday problem you're trying to think about, or like your approach to a work situation, your approach to a reading, that you're just willing to plan, willing to kind of brainstorm and think and organize your plan of attack, if you will. Be flexible. I will tell you that if COVID taught me anything, it was to be more flexible. Because before, and I want to say I'm still to a degree, I like to do things a certain way. I like to have things in a very organized, thoughtful manner, but COVID really did teach me that sometimes you have to be flexible and you have to be adaptive, which are things I tried to do anyway, but let's face it, COVID just kind of threw everyone right into that, right? But a critical thinker in general should be flexible. And that's not just like with your approach to things, but also your mindset, being flexible, being open to new ideas, being willing to bend and think in different ways. Be persistent, hey, I'm going to consistently do these things, and then be willing to self-correct. Like, hey, we don't always have it right. If I learn something, or if I made a mistake, or if I make a correction, like, acknowledge it and learn from it and go from there. All right, so how does this all tie into like critical thinking and college goals? Basically, like, obviously in college, you have to think critically. You have to be very systematic in your thinking. You have to draw your own conclusions. And then hopefully in your workforce, whatever field you're getting into, that's also going to be some critical thinking required, whether it's you are working one-on-one with a patient, you're working with a client, you're working with a group of coworkers. You're going to have to be doing these critical thinking. The next couple slides go over some critical thinking terminology, and if you have already watched the chapter 10 vocabulary video, these will look familiar because I already talked about them. So I'm not going to go into detail with them right now. That is what the chapter 10 vocabulary video will do for you, because these are on your chapter 10 vocabulary guide. So these are just words that you should be familiar with as a critical thinker. Whenever someone is talking about things that have to do with like your assertion or what's your premise, those are ideas related to critical thinking. Again, reference my chapter 10 vocabulary video for more in detail description of these vocabulary terms. And then of course you'll see them on your chapter 10 vocabulary quiz. What are some barriers to critical thinking? Again, this is on your text and skill sheet. So this is part C of that. So again, this is really helping you walk right through that assignment for chapter 10. So what are some barriers? What gets in the way when we want to be a critical thinker? A limited frame of reference. Sometimes we just don't have a lot of world experience, and which, I mean, is common, especially if you're younger and you haven't traveled a lot. So you might not have like a larger view of the world. So that gives us a very limited frame of reference. I was very fortunate, I think, at my doctoral studies at Kent. It's a very multicultural school. I got to interact with students from all over the world. And so I would think one way, and then all of a sudden my friend from Bangladesh would say something. I'm like, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. And so it really did help open my mind to this different perspectives and these different ideas. So having a limited frame of reference sometimes can be a barrier. Wishful thinking, like hoping that maybe our way is the right way, and we just want to believe so badly that what we feel, what we believe, or what we hope to be will be is wishful thinking, sometimes gets in the way of being more critical. Hasty moral judgments, we like snap judgments, right? Sometimes our own sense of moral beliefs, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, but sometimes those do get in the way because we are very adamant about our beliefs, which is not a bad thing, but sometimes those do kind of block maybe seeing another perspective or being able to see another point of view. Reliance on authority. Let's say we look up to a particular politician, we look up to a particular leader in our schools, in our churches, in our community, whatever that might be, which is okay. But then if we like almost over rely, if we just take their word for everything and not necessarily do our own research, sometimes that can present a problem. And then labeling, maybe labeling or making like assumptions or things like that can also get in the way of our critical thinking. So we just want to be aware of those things that might kind of limit or stop from expanding upon. Here are some other kind of like vocabulary type terms. Like an assertion is a statement, like here's what I believe. And then an argument is like, this is an assertion, but I'm going to prove it. Right? So that's the difference between an assertion and an argument, more vocabulary type related information here. An assertion, this is what I believe. This is like my intent. I just want you to know. My argument then says, here's how I'm going to persuade you or try to convince you to believe the way that I do. So how are you going to go about that? So here are steps in like analyzing arguments. So let's say you are crafting an argument, or you're reading someone's argument, you're hearing someone's argument. How do you go about like analyzing like how strong is this argument? So these are just some basic steps, the 4 steps, and we're going to go into more detail on each of these. What's the position? What is the argument? Like, what is the author trying to say? Are they trying to argue for something, against something? What is the issue? What are they trying to convey about that issue? It's kind of like going back to a previous chapter. Like, what's the author's purpose? What is their point of view? What are they trying to portray? And what's the topic that they're going to be focusing on? And then what support are they providing? They've made their argument, what are they giving me to help really support that argument? And there's lots of different types of supports. Are they giving me facts? Are they kind of telling me little stories? Are they pulling in experts to give me their opinions? Are they trying to give me some of their own personal experiences, and that's why they believe the way they do? Are they showing me relationship among ideas? Once you know what their argument is and what kind of support they're giving, like how is that support? How strong is that support? Are there any fallacies? And this is something that relates to your last page of your text and skill sheet. You have to look to see all these different types of fallacies. And there are tons of types of fallacies. Like in here, you will look to see, let's go right here. Scroll down, here we go. Fallacies. Again, depending on what order you're watching these videos, like there's a whole list of different type of fallacies. And a fallacy is like an error in reasoning. It appears kind of okay at first, but then you're like, oh, wait a minute. That's kind of misleading, or that is misinterpreted. Maybe they're appealing to my emotions more than they are facts. So you want to look and see what kind of, they're using maybe statistics, but are they interpreting the statistics in a way that is valid? So you look to see, is the support relevant? Is it connected? Is it believable? Can I trust this? Is it consistent? So those are things you want to look at when you're looking at an argument. And then finally, you want to like really think about the argument. Look to see like, what do you already know? What is this presenting? Check other sources, look at different perspectives, and just constantly be reflecting over the evaluation, the type of support, how relevant and connected and consistent it is, and to come to your own conclusion. Here are a couple other vocabulary terms related to this chapter as well. Inductive reasoning. This is what's called like bottom up. So whenever you have inductive reasoning, and again, this is one of those chapter 10 vocabulary terms that I would have talked about in the chapter 10 video. So you would have seen or heard this already, depending on when you watched it. But inductive reasoning is whenever you are going to like the very specific information, like the data, the numbers, the nitty gritties, and then you reach a general conclusion. So it's like the main idea at the end of a paragraph. Versus deductive reasoning is the flip side of that. Deductive is whenever you have your conclusion first, like your very general idea, and then you use all your details to support it. Okay, and so the next couple of slides just kind of talk about how you want to be able to use those 4 steps we just got done talking about to apply to any kind of argument or reading. You want to look at directions, you want to look at how it all pulls together. Part of critical thinking also might contain creative thinking. And so creative thinking is whenever you are trying to, think outside the box. Is kind of the way that it's often referred to as. But you're generating a lot of different possible solutions, and it's definitely part of that critical thinking process. Once you generate solutions, then you can critically think about those, like how are these appropriate, or what's the best possible solution. Vertical thinking is very straightforward, logical way, and lateral thinking is thinking around the problem. So those are also kind of vocabulary related terms. All right, so as always, I encourage you to look through chapter 10 on your own, get a feel for some of those vocabulary exercises, whatever it might be, to help understand the content better. And that is it for chapter 10 and for our textbook. Bye.